Hello and welcome to the Bhagavatam. Today we're going to talk about hate and anger and desire. We're going to talk about what happens to us when we are overwhelmed with these feelings and how they can literally ruin our lives and the lives of those around us. So, in the previous episode, we talked about how let me go back and do a little recap for you. So, we talked about the great king Yudhishthir, his brothers, the Pandavas, and how they had come to now rule their kingdom. King Yudhishthir was being crowned as the king of all the lands around. He was going to be crowned in what is known as the Rajasuya ceremony. And to that effect, we were starting to experience some problems. That is to say, there were some people who were envious. And in the previous episode, we talked about how Shishupal had raised a big clamor and Krishna had had to kill him. So, with all of that drama happening, the sage Shukadev, who was narrating this, was questioned by King Parikshit. So if you remember the Bhagavatam, or if you've been following from the beginning, you know of this, that the whole narrative of the Bhagavatam begins with the King Parikshit who is about to die, and he is asking the great sage Shukadev to tell him about the things that one should hear about and to prepare for the end of life. And since we are all at any moment at the end of life, we never know when that moment comes. In his case, of course, the king knew, and so he had wanted to prepare himself. So the great sage Shukadev tells the king, or rather, the king asked the sage, O Brahmin, according to what I have heard from you, all the assembled kings, sages, and devas, the demigods, were delighted to see the wonderful festivities of King Yudhishthir's Rajasuya sacrifice. So you remember there was this king Yudhishthir, and he was about to become the king of all the lands around. They had defeated all the enemies, and now he was going to become like the emperor. And so everybody was very happy with this, with some exceptions. There was Jarasandha, he had been killed. There was Shishupal, he had been killed. And now there was the cousin of the Pandavas, Yudhishthir's cousin, whose name was Duryodhana. And so the king Parikshit is asking the sage Shukadev, tell me, why was Duryodhana so unhappy with the Rajasuya, with the sacrifice, the ceremony, the coronation, shall we say, of King Yudhishthir as the great emperor for all the lands in that area? So Shukadev replies, at the Rajasuya sacrifice of your saintly grandfather, King Yudhishthir, so Parikshit's grandfather, King Parikshit's king who was about to die, Parikshit, his grandfather was King Yudhishthir. King Yudhishthir was the eldest of the 5 brothers, the Pandavas. Okay, I hope I'm not losing you here. They were the royal family at the time, the Pandavas. And we'll talk a little bit more about them. But yes, as I'd shown you earlier, the Pandavas and King Yudhishthir. All right. So, So what he's saying is that King Yudhishthir, his family members, bound by their love for him, engaged themselves in humble services on his behalf. Now, what kind of humble services do you think that they performed? After all, there were, 5 brothers that Yudhishthir had, the Pandavas. One of them, Bhim, supervised the kitchen. So Bhim was very fond of eating, and so it was perfect for him to supervise the kitchen. Duryodhana, the envious cousin, who we talked about a moment ago, looked after the treasury. He wanted to check in on the treasury and see how much money they had, what kind of wealth they had. Sahadev, one of the younger brothers, respectfully greeted the arriving guests. Nakul was also one of the younger brothers of Yudhishthir, and he procured the needed items. Arjun attended the respectable elders. And Krishna, the supreme Godhead, the supreme Lord of all creation, chose the ultimate act of service, and that was he washed everyone's feet. This is the greatness of God. That supreme Lord who shows again and again and again his tremendous power through the entire Bhagavatam, or at least in the 10th canto that talks about him. He chose to honor everyone by washing their feet. This is the ultimate act of humility. This is what he did when Narad Muni came to visit him. This is what he did when, even when his friend came to visit, he washed his feet and drank the water. Meanwhile, Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas, served food, and the generous Karan, who was actually the brother of the Pandavas, but nobody knew that at this point, he gave out gifts. While many others similarly volunteered for various duties during the elaborate sacrifice, they did so because of their eagerness to please King Yudhishthir. After the priests, the prominent delegates, the greatly learned saints, and the king's most intimate well-wishers had all been properly honored with pleasing words, auspicious gifts, and were received in the most wonderful way, they proceeded to the divine river Yamuna, which was nearby, for the special bathing of the emperor. Yudhishthira was about to be coronated, and there's something called the Avabhrita bath that was to be performed in the divine Yamuna river. So during this time, as they're walking towards the river, various musicians and dancers were performing. During the Avabhrita celebration, the music of many kinds of instruments resounded, including drums, conch shells, horns, venas, flutes, and hand cymbals, and many more. Female dancers danced with great joy, and choruses sang, while the loud vibrations of musical instruments reached all the way to the heavenly regions. It was tremendous celebration all around. All the kings, wearing golden necklaces, then set off for the river as well. They had flags and banners of various colors and were accompanied by infantrymen and well-adorned soldiers riding lordly elephants, chariots, and horses. The massive armies of the assembled kings made the earth tremble as they followed King Yudhishthir in procession. The assembly officials, the priests, and other excellent Brahmins resoundingly vibrated Vedic mantras, while the devas, the demigods, the divine sages, pittas, and gandharvas sang praises and rained down flowers. Sometimes people talk about angels and so on, but here in the Bhagavatam, they very abundantly talk about divine beings from the heavenly planets, angelic beings who are showering their praises on such a wonderful king as Yudhishthir. They are showering flowers, they are singing praises, and they are coming to visit these auspicious moments. Men and women, all adorned with sandalwood paste, flower garlands, jewelry, and fine clothing, sported by smearing and sprinkling one another with various liquids. You might have heard of Holi, this festival, which people smear each other with colors. And now, in the land of Vrindavan, you will see that this celebration of this festival is not done with any color. They do it with incredibly wonderful substances like turmeric, like rose water, like natural substances that, while colorful, at the same time are not toxic. Now, a lot of people have gone into Holi with all kinds of toxic colors, and that's not the way it was meant to be. In fact, I remember walking down the streets of Vrindavan on Holi, and people were sprinkling each other with colored water, and the colored water was made from flower petals. It had flower petals they'd soaked overnight. I think it's called gandha, which is aster. Anyway, it gives a wonderful fragrance, and it was warm water. So it's a wonderful festival. In fact, it's coming up in a few days. I think this year it's the 13th of March. And yeah, it's just wonderful to see that even back then these celebrations took place. So the men smeared the courtesans with plentiful oil, yogurt, perfumed water, turmeric, and kumkum powder, and the courtesans playfully smeared the men with the same substances. King Yudhishthira, surrounded by guards, King Yudhishthira's queens came out on their chariots to see the fun, just as the demigods, the devas' wives, appeared in the sky in celestial airplanes. Clearly, we're talking about UFOs here. As maternal cousins and intimate friends sprinkled the queens with liquids, the ladies' faces bloomed with shy smiles, enhancing the queen's splendid beauty. As the queens squirted water from syringes at their brothers-in-law and other male companions, their own garments became drenched, revealing their arms, breasts, thighs, and waists. In their excitement, the flowers fell from their loosened braids. By these charming pastimes, they agitated those with contaminated consciousness. In other words, people who had lusty desires became, their consciousness became contaminated as they lusted over these women who were the wives of Krishna or the wives of other people, but they're like seeing them wet and, their clothes clinging to them. They became filled with lusty desire. So it says here, by these charming pastimes, they agitated those with contaminated consciousness. The emperor, mounted upon his chariot, drawn by excellent horses, this is Emperor Yudhishthira, and the horses were wearing golden collars. They appeared splendid in the company of his wives. The priests led the execution of the final rituals of Patni Samyaja and Avabhritya. Then they had the king and his queen Draupadi sip water for purification and bathe in the river. The kettle drums of the gods resounded along with those of human beings. Demigods, sages, forefathers, and humans all poured down showers of flowers. All the citizens then bathed in that place, in the river, where even the most grievous sinner can immediately be freed from all sinful reactions. It says by bathing in the Yamuna or the Ganga, one is freed from all karma, from all sinful reactions. Many a time people say, oh, Christ died on the cross for your sins, or whatever else. A guru sometimes say they will take your sins. But this is freely available and has been for thousands of years, simply by taking a bath in the Ganga, in the Yamuna. People gathered this year for the Mahakumbh. It was the same thing. They were gathering so to become freed from all their sins. But remember, becoming freed of all your sins is not the end of the journey. Every step you take, every thought you make, every deed and desire that you have, there is karma. And if those things are of a negative nature, as in harmful to others, envious of others, critical of others, where you do harm to others, then there will be a sinful reaction, which means negative karma, basically. Anyway, back to our story. Then the king put on new silken garments and adorned himself with fine jewelry. He then honored the priests, the assembled officials, learned Brahmins, and other guests by presenting them with ornaments and clothing. In this way, King Yudhishthir, who had totally dedicated his life to Narayan, Sri Krishna, continuously honored his relatives, his immediate family, and other kings, his friends and well-wishers, and all others present as well. So it's not just about honoring the king. The king, in turn, is honoring everybody else. All the men there shone like demigods. See the wonderful jewelry and the wonderful ornaments that they were wearing. They were adorned with jeweled earrings, flower garlands, turbans, waistcoats, silk dhotis, and valuable pearl necklaces. The lovely faces of the women were beautified by their matched earrings and locks of hair. And they all wore golden belts. Then, after King Yudhishthir had worshipped all the specially invited kings, the priests, the Kshatriyas, the warriors, the Vaishyas, the Shudras, in other words, all classes of people, the king was honoring even the laborers, the workers, the Shudras, the business people, everyone. Then he honored the demigods, the devas, the sages, the forefathers, and mystic spirits, even mystic spirits. And then he honored the chief planetary rulers and their followers. Means the beings who are in charge of the various planetary systems across the universe. All of them, those who had assembled, the kings and people and all, took the king's permission and departed for their homes. As they traveled, they glorified the wonderful Rajasuya ceremony that they had just witnessed, performed by the great saintly King Yudhishthir. And they were not satiated. Just as ordinary person is never satiated when drinking nectar. At that time, King Yudhishthir stopped a number of his friends, immediate family members, and other relatives from departing. Among them was Sri Krishna. Out of love, Yudhishthir could not let them go, for he felt the pain of imminent separation. You see this deep family bond, this deep connection, this absolutely wonderful, heartfelt way of living life. Krishna, the Supreme Lord, remained there for some time to please the king. After first sending Samba and other Yadu members, so people from his family, his dynasty, back to Dwarka, so he sent them back while he stayed on. Thus King Yudhishthir, the son of Dharma, was at last relieved of his burning ambition, having by the grace of Sri Krishna successfully crossed the vast and formidable ocean of his desires. So he had a desire, the king. That desire was the same as Krishna's desire. His desire was no different than Krishna's desire. And Krishna's desire was the establishment of Dharma all across the planet. He wanted everywhere that there should be codes of righteousness, the codes of how humans should live. Dharma is about how we need to live in harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the planet. Something that we've all forgotten now. And in our greed to become and have and do more and more and more and more, in that greed we have forgotten or paid little regard to what it takes to honor each other and the planet, and ourselves for that matter. They have no idea. Now, the events that come next need to be understood in the context of the background of all that has been going on in the life of the Pandavas. So these 5 brothers, the Pandavas, their wife, their story begins in a very interesting place. So to proceed, we need to get an idea of the background. It all begins with their mother, Queen Kunti. You see, her husband, Pandu, could not have any children. So then Queen Kunti had this boon that was given to her where she could call on the devas, different devas, and through them she was able to have a child. So she called on Surya and had a child with him. Various devas. Long story, I'm not going to get into it right now. That's all in the Mahabharata. But having had these children, unfortunately, her husband, Pandu, died. And her co-wife, Madri, also committed sati and walked into the funeral pyre. But Kunti stayed back to take care of the children. Now, when they came back, although her husband was the eldest and was to become the king, the younger brother, that was Dhritarashtra, now assumed the place of the king instead of Pandu. So this Dhritarashtra, his son was Duryodhana. Dhritarashtra is the blind king. You see, although he was elder, he was not made king because of his blindness. Now that the younger brother Pandu had died, he was once again put back as the king. And in his greatest influencer was Duryodhana, his eldest son. Now, this Duryodhana hated his cousins, the Pandavas. And he tried everything to kill them. In fact, he actually arranged for them to be... There was an incident where he tried to kill Bhim. Then there was an incident where he tried to kill all the brothers. He invited them to this particular house where they were supposed to go on vacation. And then that entire house had been made in such a way that it was made of this flammable substance called lac. And then it was set on fire in the middle of the night. But the Pandava brothers, the 5 Pandavas and their mother Kunti, had been warned by someone that this is what was going to happen. So they had an escape route through which they went. And then they were incognito for some months, during which time they came across Draupadi and got married to her, and then eventually came back to the palace. And everyone was so happy in the... all the people were so happy that the Pandavas, because they loved Yudhishthira and they loved the Pandavas, they didn't so much care for Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra. So when the Pandavas were back, there was great celebration. However, the envy of Duryodhana didn't go away. Eventually, the Pandavas were given a separate area where they could set up their own kingdom. Because after all, this was all about politics and it was all about the kingdom and who was going to rule. So the blind king Dhritarashtra and his son Duryodhana, and he had 100 sons in fact, they lived in the main capital Hastinapur. What they did was they gave a barren piece of land to Yudhishthira and his brothers, the Pandavas. Now, through Krishna's arrangement, they managed to deal with the demon architect called Maya Danava, and they've created a wonderful place within this place called Indraprastha. And Indraprastha, they made it into a magical kingdom, so beautiful that it far exceeded that of Duryodhana. Now, this Indraprastha was so amazingly beautiful, and it had been designed by Maya Danava, who was an asura, but at the same time very obligated to Arjuna and Krishna, who had rescued him. So this is around 7,000 years ago, 5,000 BC. Now, one day, Duryodhana came to visit. This is after the Rajasuya sacrifice, the big ceremony and the crowning of Yudhishthira, his cousin. So Duryodhana, who we've been talking about, came to visit. And when he came, something tricky happened. Duryodhana was... Okay, let's go back a little. Let's make sure you remember Duryodhana, the son of the blind king, all right? Their capital was Hastinapur. He'd come to Indraprastha to visit his cousins. And while observing the riches of King Yudhishthira's palace, right, and his beautiful capital of Indraprastha, the magnificence of the Rajasuya sacrifice, this Duryodhana was feeling tremendously disturbed and envious of his cousin Yudhishthir, who was the life and soul of Krishna. In the palace of Indraprastha, all the collected opulences of the kings of men, demons, and gods were brilliantly manifest, having been brought together by the cosmic inventor Mayadanava. With those riches, Draupadi had served her husband. Now Duryodhana, the prince of the Kurus, lamented because he was very much attracted to her. So on one hand, he wanted to have Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas. On the other hand, he was extremely envious of their opulence and their kingdom and how incredible they had turned this wasteland into this incredible place. So he came to visit the palace of Indraprastha, at Indraprastha rather. Krishna and his queens were also staying in that palace at that time. The queens moved slowly, and the bells on their feet tinkled charmingly. Their waists were very slender. The kumkum from their breasts reddened their pearl necklaces, and their swaying earrings and flowing locks of hair enhanced the exquisite beauty of their faces. Now it so happened that the Emperor Yudhishthir, the son of Dharma, was sitting just like Indra on a golden throne in the assembly hall built by Mayadanava. So now he was in his courtroom, King Yudhishthir. There he was, surrounded by Krishna was there, his attendants were there, his family members were there, right? And Yudhishthir was being praised by the court poets. Now proud Duryodhana, holding a sword in his hand and wearing a crown and necklace, angrily went into the palace in the company of his brothers. And as he entered, he insulted the doorkeepers. Bewildered by the illusions created by Mayadanava's magic. Now you see, this palace was full of illusions. And there were all kinds of, like nowadays how we have our smart homes and all kinds of gadgets in them. Well, the person who had constructed this palace where Duryodhana held court had put into it many wonderful little magic things that would amuse people. However, nobody knew what was going to actually happen. Duryodhana, came in there on his own, stormed into the place, and he mistook the solid floor for water. He mistook the solid floor for water. He lifted the end of his garment, and then elsewhere he fell into water, mistaking it for the solid floor. At this point, everyone began to laugh. Bhim laughed to see this, and so did the women, the kings, and others who were present. King Yudhishthir realized that his cousin was going to be pretty upset. He tried to stop everyone, but everyone was roaring in laughter. Krishna also showed his approval, trying to encourage everyone. Humiliated and burning with anger, Duryodhana turned his face down, left without uttering a word, and went back to his capital, Hastinapur. The saintly persons present loudly cried out, "Oh my goodness, alas!" And King Yudhishthir was somewhat saddened. But the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, whose mere glance had bewildered Duryodhana. So now we understand it was actually Krishna whose glance had bewildered Duryodhana. Krishna remained silent. For his intention was to remove the burden of the earth. And Duryodhana was one of the big culprits in that, who was creating a lot of havoc all around, who was creating a lot of hellish situations for people all across his kingdom. This humiliation of Duryodhana led to all the events that followed, including the game of dice in which Duryodhana tricked the Pandavas and took away their entire kingdom. He banished the Pandavas to the forest for 14 years, all of which then led to the Battle of Mahabharata, in which millions of soldiers died. So this was sort of building up. This was just one of the events along the way that led to a huge drama. If you'd like to know more about that, there's the wonderful book called the Mahabharata. Please read it. There's an audiobook available as well. Found it on Amazon as well as on Apple Books. Now, Shukadev says, let's move on to another thing. He says, now please hear, O king, he's telling Parikshit, another wondrous deed performed by Sri Krishna, who appeared in his human-like body to enjoy transcendental pastimes. So again, very clearly, a human-like body. It was human-like in that, just as we say, man is made in the image of God. Well, true. God has a similar human-like body. But there is a difference. The body of God is not subject to birth or death or old age or disease. He does not come on earth in a physical body that is made of skin and blood and bones, but rather he comes in his transcendental body, that is to say, a spiritual form, which he makes visible to the eyes of those present. Krishna very clearly says in the Bhagavad Gita, I appear millennium after millennium in my original transcendental form to annihilate the miscreants and to establish the principles of Dharma. So now we're coming to another very important character. His name is Shalva. He's a friend of Shishupal. Let's go back a little bit in time, and in some the earlier episodes you'd heard of this before, so I'm going to refresh your memory. It all begins with Rukmini. Rukmini was the first wife of Krishna. She wanted to marry Krishna, but her brother Rukmi wanted her to marry Shishupal. So she wrote a letter to Krishna, please come and get me. I don't want to marry this guy. I have always thought of you. I have always loved you, and I want to be with you. It was pretty direct of her. So at that point, Krishna, who had never met her in this life anyway, comes and kidnaps her from what was going to be her wedding day. And at that point, having taken her with him, her brother Rukmi follows, tries to attack Krishna and get back his sister because he wants her to marry Shishupal. But Krishna defeats Rukmi and all the other princes, including Shishupal, including Jarasandha, including so many others, and ends up humiliating her brother. He's about to kill her brother, but Rukmini requests, please don't kill my brother. And Krishna doesn't, so he just chops off part of his hair, part of his mustache, and just humiliates and lets him go. But Rukmi's friend, that is the brother's friend, Shishupal, wasn't having this. He was extremely upset on behalf of his friend. And later on, he had come to the court where Yudhishthir's fire ceremony was taking place, and he had insulted Krishna tremendously. And during that time, Krishna had killed him with his Sudarshan Chakra. Now, all of that is in the earlier episodes. I'm not going to go into it here, but just to recap a little bit. So that was Shishupal. His head had been chopped off right in the middle of the assembly as he cursed and abused Krishna again and again and again. Now, this Shalva that we're going to talk about was a friend of Shishupal. Shalva was also present at the wedding of Rukmini when the Krishna and his soldiers had defeated Rukmi as well as Shishupal and all of them, along with Jarasandha and other kings. Shalva, who was present at that time, swore in the presence of all the kings that he would rid the earth of Krishna and his family, the Yadavas. He said, just see my prowess. Having thus made this vow, the foolish king proceeded to worship Shiva as his deity by eating only a handful of dust every day and nothing more. Now, Shiva is normally very easy to please and has often been approached by people like this for great blessings. Shiva has never discriminated between good and evil. And even if an evil person had asked him for something, Shiva has often granted him that. Because of Shiva's great compassion, his great mercy, his great kindness. People have often taken advantage of him. So the great Umapati, the husband of Uma, Shiva, is known as he who is quickly pleased, yet only at the end of a year did he gratify Shalva's wish. Shalva, who had approached him for shelter by offering him, and then Shiva gave Shalva a choice of benedictions. Shalva chose a vehicle that could not be destroyed by anyone, neither demigods, demons, humans, Gandharvas, or Rakshasas. In other words, no one could destroy it. That a vehicle that could travel anywhere he wished to go, and that would terrify Krishna's family, the Vrishnis. Shiva said, so be it. On his order, Mayadanava, the same Mayadanava, constructed a flying iron city named Saubha and presented it to Shalva. So in the Vedas, there is also talk about things like Vimanas. Many people are fascinated. There's an entire Viman Shastra which talks about flying vehicles. In this case, it was a flying city. Okay? A UFO that could travel anywhere in space, intergalactic travel, and at the same time, a fully contained city. Now, this unassailable vehicle, undefeatable vehicle was filled with darkness and could go anywhere. In other words, it was a stealth vehicle. It could go anywhere. Upon obtaining it, Shalva went to Krishna's capital, Dwarka, remembering the Vrishnis or Krishna's family's enmity towards him. Shalva besieged the city, attacked it with a large army, decimating, destroying the outlying parks and gardens, the mansions, along with their observatories, towering gateways and surrounding walls, and also the public recreational areas. From his excellent airship, he threw down a torrent of weapons. Not only weapons, but he included within that stones and tree trunks and thunderbolts, snakes and hailstones. A fierce whirlwind arose and blanketed all directions with dust. Terribly tormented by the airship Saubha, Krishna's city had no peace. Seeing his subjects so harassed, the glorious and heroic eldest son of Krishna, whose name was Pradyumna, told them, "Do not fear," and mounted his chariot. Accompanied by soldiers riding on chariots, elephants, and horses and infantry, a tumultuous, hair-raising battle then commenced between Shalva's forces and the Yadus, that's Krishna's family. It equaled the great battles between the Asuras and the Devas, the demigods and the demons. With his divine weapons, Pradyumna, Krishna's son, instantly destroyed all of Shalva's magic illusions. See, this Shalva was not just some ordinary guy. He had all kinds of illusions and magical tricks that he would play. This UFO building that he had, this whole city that he had, could move from one place to another, could disappear instantly, could appear suddenly, could be here, could be there. It was pretty wild. So with his divine weapons, Pradyumna instantly destroyed all of Shalva's magic illusions in the same way that the warm rays of the sun dissipate the darkness of night. Pradyumna's arrows all had gold shafts, iron heads, and perfectly smooth joints. With 25 of them, he struck down Shalva's commander-in-chief. And with 100 arrows, he struck Shalva himself. Then he pierced Shalva's officers with 1 arrow each, his chariot drivers with 10 arrows each, and his horses and other carriers with 3 arrows each. When they saw the glorious Pradyumna perform that amazing and mighty feat, all the soldiers on both sides praised him. At one moment, the magic airship built by Mayadanava appeared in many identical forms, like there were multiple versions of it. And the next moment, it was again only one. Sometimes it was visible and sometimes not. Thus, Shalva's opponents could never be sure where it was. From one moment to the next, the Shaubha airship, the UFO, appeared on the earth and in the sky, or on a mountain peak, or in the water. Like a whirling, flaming baton, it never remained in one place. Whether Shalva would appear with his Shaubha airship and his army, there the Yadu commanders would shoot their arrows. Shalva became bewildered upon seeing his army and aerial city thus harassed by his enemy's arrows. So he was pretty amazed that they were able to inflict as much damage as they did. Krishna's army inflict as much damage as they did on Shalva. Because the heroes of the Yadava dynasty, as Krishna's family, were eager for victory in this world and the next, they did not abandon their assigned posts on the battlefield, even though the downpour of weapons hurled by Shalva's commanders tormented them. Shalva's minister, Dhuman, previously wounded by Pradyumna, now ran up to him and, roaring loudly, struck Pradyumna with his club of black steel. Pradyumna's chariot driver, so Pradyumna's Krishna's son, his chariot driver thought that his valiant master's chest had been shattered by the club. Knowing well his religious duty, he removed Pradyumna from the battlefield. Quickly regaining consciousness, Krishna's son Pradyumna said to his charioteer, "O driver, this is abominable for me to have been removed from the battlefield. Except for me, no one born in the Yadu dynasty has ever been known to abandon the battlefield. My reputation has now been stained by a driver who thinks like a eunuch." Pradyumna is really pissed off with him, obviously, right? "What will I say to my father, Balaram and Krishna, who when I return to them after having simply fled the battle, what can I tell them that will benefit my honor? Certainly my sisters-in-law will laugh at me and say, 'Oh hero, tell us how in the world your enemies turned you into such a coward in battle.'" The driver replied, "O long-lived one, I have done this knowing fully well my prescribed duty. Oh my lord, the chariot driver must protect the master of the chariot when he is in danger, and the master must also protect his driver. With this rule in mind, I removed you from the battlefield since you had been struck unconscious by your enemy's club, and I thought you were seriously injured." Now, meanwhile, then at this point now, Pradyumna puts on his armor, refreshes himself with water, picks up his bow, and comes back to the battlefield. He goes back to where that person who attacked him, Dhuman, was standing. In Pradyumna's absence, Dhuman had been devastating his army. And now Pradyumna counterattacked Dhuman and, smiling, pierced him with 8 Naracha arrows. With 4 of these arrows, he struck Dhuman's 4 arrows, with 1 arrow his driver, and with 2 arrows his bow and chariot flag, and with the last arrow Dhuman's head. So they have the ability to fire multiple arrows at the same time, and each of them would hit the target. Gada, Satyaki, Samba, and others began killing Shalva's army, and thus all the soldiers inside the airship, the UFO, began falling into the ocean, their necks severed. As the Yadus, Krishna's family, and Shalva's followers thus went on attacking one another, the tumultuous, fearsome battle continued for 27 days and nights. At this time, Krishna was still in Indraprastha with his cousin Yudhishthir. Now that the Rajasuya sacrifice had been completed and Shishupal killed, Krishna began to see inauspicious omens. So Krishna already knew what's happening. He had already sent some of his people back because he knew they were going to be needed. But he plays the part of a human. Krishna began to see inauspicious omens. Now there's no telephone, there's no, wireless communication, no mobile phones, but he sees the omens. He sees the signs, and so he knows there's something wrong. He quickly took leave of the Kuru elders and the great sages, Queen Kunti and the Pandavas, and returned to Dwarka. Krishna thought to himself, because I have come here with my elder brother Balaram, kings partial to Shishupal may be attacking my capital city. He already knew what was happening. After he arrived at Dwarka and saw how his people were threatened with destruction, and also saw Shalva and his Shalva airship, Krishna arranged for the city's defense and then addressed his charioteer. "O driver, quickly take my chariot near Shalva. He is a powerful magician. Don't let him bewilder you." So we're talking about not just a regular magician, we're talking about someone who had mystical powers. He had powers that were far beyond any ordinary magician here. Thus ordered, Daruka, Krishna's chariot driver, took command of Krishna's chariot and drove forth. And as the chariot entered the battlefield, everyone there, both friend and foe, caught sight of him. When Shalva, the master of a decimated army, so now his army has been really badly hit, Shalva's army. When he saw Krishna approaching, he hurled his spear at Krishna's charioteer. The spear roared frighteningly as it flew across the battlefield. Shalva's hurtling spear lit up the whole sky like a mighty meteor. So it wasn't an ordinary spear. This was like a fiery spear, which lit up the entire sky like a mighty meteor. But Krishna tore the great weapon into hundreds of pieces with his arrows. Krishna then pierced Shalva with 16 arrows and struck the Shalva airship with a deluge of arrows as it darted about the sky. Firing his arrows, Krishna appeared like the sun, flooding the heavens with its rays. Shalva then managed to strike Krishna's left arm, which held his bow, Sharanga, which then fell from Krishna's hand. Those who witnessed this all cried out in dismay. Then Shalva roared loudly and addressed Krishna. Shalva said, "You fool! Because in our presence you kidnapped the bride of our friend Shishupal, your own cousin, and because you later murdered him in the sacred assembly while he was inattentive. Today, with my sharp arrows, I will send you to the land of no return. Though you think yourself invincible, I will kill you now if you dare stand before me." The Supreme Lord said, "O dullard, you boast in vain, since you fail to see death standing near you. Real heroes do not talk much but rather show their prowess in action." Having said this, the furious Krishna swung his club with frightening power and speed and hit Shalva on the collarbone, making him tremble and vomit blood. And as soon as Krishna withdrew his club, Shalva disappeared from sight. And a moment later, a man approached Krishna. Bowing his head, the man said, "Devaki, your mother, has sent me." And sobbing, he said, "O Krishna, Krishna, mighty armed one, who are so affectionate to your parents, Shalva has seized your father and taken him away, as a butcher leads an animal to slaughter." When he heard this disturbing news, Krishna, who was playing the role of a mortal man, showed sorrow and compassion, and out of love for his parents, he spoke like an ordinary conditioned soul. Krishna said, "My brother Balaram is ever vigilant, and no demigod or demon can defeat him. So how could this insignificant Shalva defeat him and abduct my father? Indeed, fate is all-powerful." After Krishna spoke these words, Shalva again appeared. Now he showed himself, standing right there. This was an illusion he had created, apparently leading Krishna's father, Vasudeva. So he appeared there, and he was bringing Krishna's father, Vasudeva, with him. Then Shalva said, "Here is your dear father who begot you, and for whose sake you are living in this world. I shall now kill him before your very eyes. Save him if you can, weakling." After he had mocked Krishna in this way, the magician Shalva appeared to cut off Krishna's father's head with his sword. Taking the head with him, he entered the Shalva flying vehicle. So he went back to his flying vehicle, his UFO, which was hovering in the sky. Now, by nature, Krishna is full in knowledge, and he possesses unlimited powers of perception. Yet for a moment, out of great affection for his loved ones, he remained absorbed in the mood of an ordinary human being. He soon recalled, however, that this was all a demonic illusion engineered by Mayadanava and employed by Shalva. Now, alert to the actual situation, Krishna saw before him on the battlefield neither the messenger nor his father's body. So in fact, it was clear now, it was just a trick. It was as if he had awakened from a dream. Seeing his enemy flying above him in his Shalva plane or UFO, Krishna prepared to kill him. In the purport it is said, if someone thinks that Krishna was actually bewildered by Shalva's magic and was subjected to ordinary mundane lamentation, such an opinion is illogical and contradictory, since it is well known that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, transcendental and absolute. How can lamentation bewilderment, material affection, or fear, all born out of ignorance. See, these things, lamentation, bewilderment, material affection, or fear, are born out of ignorance. Interesting. What do you mean born out of ignorance? We humans, we feel all this. We feel lamentation. We get bewildered by situations. We have material affection. We are attached to our material possessions and to our friends and family. And we have fears. And here he's saying is born out of ignorance. Yes, the same thing is said in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. The wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. The same point is being made here. It's born out of ignorance. Our fears are born out of ignorance. Our lamentation is born out of ignorance. Why? Because the soul never dies. But we think in terms of the body. We think the person is that body. And if that body dies, say, oh my God, this person died, and this tremendous lamentation. But the soul never dies. That person never died. That person cannot die. The only thing is, yes, there is some grief, of course, that we're not going to have their company or their association or their presence in this form that we knew them. That is true. But as such, they're safe. They're fine. Nothing's going to harm them. Their spirit, their soul cannot be destroyed. Krishna says again in the Gita, for the soul cannot be destroyed. Not by fire, not by water, not by death, not by anything. Death is primarily an illusion. So, and similarly with all our possessions, we have them today. At the end of life, they're taken away from us. They were never ours in the first place. So how can lamentation, bewilderment, material affection, or fear, all born out of ignorance, be ascribed to the infinite Supreme Lord, whose perception, knowledge, and power are all similarly infinite? How can you ascribe that? By virtue of self-realization fortified by service rendered to his feet, devotees of Krishna dispel the bodily concept of life, which has bewildered the soul since time immemorial. What is this bodily concept of life? This bodily concept means that I am this body, that my thoughts are me, my mind is me, my body is me, that those who are connected to this body, my family members, my children, my spouse, my partner, they're all part of me, my possessions, everything. And this is the bodily concept of life. To think that all this is I, me, and mine. And that's the illusion. That is the matrix. That is is Maya that we live in here. And because of that, we suffer. But the moment we understand that, at least we understand it deeply enough, the moment we experience the soul, we understand that the soul is really the ultimate reality, and all of this is the illusion. Then our suffering diminishes massively. I'm not saying it goes away, not at least at the state that you and I are in. But for those who are truly awakened, enlightened, and who have reached that place, for them, of course, there is no suffering because they see through the illusion. We who still are in the illusion still suffer. But we need to take solace here and understand the ultimate reality, the real truth, the truth beyond illusion of this world. So this illusion has bewildered the soul since time immemorial. Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you. So we have been around since time immemorial. And why are we still here in this world, being subject to birth, death, old age, and disease? Why? Because we are bewildered. Bewildered by what? By all the stuff of this world, by this body, by this mind, by our desires. We are overtaken by them. We are controlled by them. We think we are independent. We think we are free. But no. Even if you live in the so-called land of the free, you are not free. You could never be free as long as you are in illusion, thinking that this is who I am, that this is the reality. Whereas in fact, this is the illusion. Of course, it appears very real and it causes us pain. If we bump our head against something or we twist our foot, we're in pain. If we have disease, we're in pain. Yes, that's because of our identification with this. So what he's now pointing out is that even by virtue of self-realization, fortified by service rendered to the feet of Krishna by devotion, devotees of Krishna dispel the bodily concept of life which has bewildered the soul since time immemorial. Thus they attain eternal glory in his personal association. They get to be with Krishna and they get to be with him eternally. Right? So they attain eternal glory in his personal association. How then can Krishna, the absolute truth, the destination of all genuine saints, be subjected to illusion? Right? While Shalva continued to hurl torrents of weapons at Krishna with great force, Krishna, whose prowess never fails, shot his arrows at Shalva, wounding him and shattering his armor, bow, and crest jewel. Then with his club, Krishna smashed Shalva, the flying airship, the UFO of Shalva. Shattered into thousands of pieces by Krishna's club, the Shalva airship plummeted into the water. So remember, they were on an island, so plummeted into the ocean. Shalva abandoned it, stationed himself on the ground, took up his club, and rushed towards Krishna. As Shalva rushed at Krishna, Krishna shot a bhalla dart, a special kind of arrow, and cut off his arm that held the club. Having finally decided to kill Shalva, Krishna then raised his Sudarshan Chakra. I think you might remember, Sudarshan Chakra is Krishna's ultimate weapon. So he raised his Sudarshan Chakra, which resembled the sun at the time of universal annihilation. The brilliantly shining Supreme Lord appeared like the easternmost mountain bearing the rising sun. Employing his disc, Krishna removed that great magician's head and its earrings and crown. Seeing this, all of Shalva's followers cried out, "Oh my!" With the sinful Shalvas now dead and his Shalva airship destroyed, the heavens resounded with kettle drums played by groups of devas and demigods. Then Dantavakra, his friend, Shalva's friend, wanting to avenge the death of his friend, furiously attacked Krishna. We're going to save that for next time. So to be continued. With that, we come to the end of today's reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam. If you have any questions or would like to ask something, please feel free. If not, if you have questions and you're rewatching this afterwards and the YouTube channel, please write your comments. I'd love to answer them. And I'll see you next week if there are no questions now. Okay. Hare Krishna. See you next week.